We are at Sister Carmen Community Center in Lafayette, Colorado. We have Suzanne Crawford, who is the CEO of Sister Carmen, and we have Dan Mackin, who is the board chair. And we want to have a conversation today just about Sister Carmen and its work with Aligned Influence. Just telling the story and having a conversation about what that looks like today in a very successful nonprofit in the area. So let me start out by just having you describe Sister Carmen. So Suzanne, you want to kick us off just by what is Sister Carmen and how does it fit into the East Boulder County, Lafayette area?
Sure. Sister Carmen Community Center is a family resource center that serves a very specific part of Boulder County, so Lafayette, Louisville, Superior, and Erie. And we've been around since approximately 1978. We were started by a group of volunteers and a Catholic nun who was doing outreach in this area. They quickly discovered that there were people in this community that needed food and clothing and had some basic needs that they weren't meeting, and so those folks started collecting items for members in our community who were in need. And from that, the center emerged and eventually became a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're non-religious. We provide a variety of different services and supports for community members, including a food bank, financial assistance, classes. We have a thrift store where anyone can shop for items at very low cost, and if they can't afford them, we can give them a voucher to get things there for free. So that's Sister Carmen Community Center in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's great. So I would love to have you think about when Sister Carmen and Aligned Influence started working together, sort of what is it that brought Aligned Influence and Sister Carmen together?
At that time in our evolution, we had been doing policy governance for a number of years. And for a while, it worked quite well. And then everything just went a bit off the rails. The board no longer held to their responsibilities and quite often crossed over into operations. And it just became a situation where, unfortunately, things became a little bit toxic. And I didn't feel, as the CEO, that I had any recourse. And I did not feel that I could criticize the board members. They, for what they were doing. And when I did attempt it, people would just get very angry and defensive with me. So it was a situation where I felt stuck between a rock and a hard place. And to be fair, the board members weren't super happy either, because I don't think they really knew what their responsibilities were.
Yeah, it's a story I hear a lot about when we were doing policy governance, and the policies weren't solving the problem, and so we needed to go beyond that. So you talked about the challenges for you at that time. Dan, I know you weren't here when we kicked this off, and I think that's a big part of this story. So tell your story about how you started with Sister Carmen and where you are in this sequence, because you're 3-4 board chairs down the road now from when we started.
Yeah, I came in as a board member. It was my first foray into nonprofit directorship, I guess it might be the word. And, I will say that as a new board member, it was a little challenging to, wrap my head around, at least until I got here, kind of what our role was and like how we fit into the broader organization and where I would be expected to provide input or guidance and where it would be appropriate for me to kind of, back off on that type of stuff. And so, coming in as a board member, I felt like the Aligned Influence model provided really clear guidance on what we as board members, what our responsibilities are, or how we can help direct the center without, crossing that line and getting too involved in the operations aspect. So that was really alleviated a lot of my concerns as soon as I got here, because it was pretty clearly defined, and that was really nice as a board member to really kind of understand what our role was.
Yeah, I think that we shouldn't undervalue that, because the fact that you've gone through maybe 3-4 board chair transitions, and we're still in a really healthy place as we move forward. So, Suzanne, you even started to talk about a little bit about maybe what the board's challenges were back then. If you had to imagine if we had one of those board members here from 8 years ago, something in that range, what would you have said that they would have said their challenges were?
I would say specifically for instance, the board chair and vice chair, they obviously could see that there was a problem that had been developing, especially in relation to one specific board member who would not remain vigilant in his role and would interfere with staff conversations, with staff job duties, gave unsolicited opinion and advice, things like that. And I think that our chair at the time could see this happening. And of course, I pointed it out politely behind the scenes, but he had no idea how to really handle it and sort of rein this person in and get them back on track with what their actual responsibilities were. Perhaps because by that point, there was considerable confusion, I think, around what board responsibilities were versus my responsibilities and staff responsibilities. Part of that developed because a few years prior, we embarked on a capital campaign. We purchased the facility that we're in now. It ended up being a pretty complicated project. We had to remodel the building that we were in before. And I am one person, so I could not handle all of the additional responsibilities myself. We had a board member at the time that was very capable, had a lot of experience with building projects and things like that. So he came along as sort of a volunteer project manager, in addition to and outside of his board role. Unfortunately, that was really the impetus for a lot of what went on afterwards, because it became very difficult for him to tell the difference between his board role and then once the campaign was over and the building projects were done, I don't think he had enough to do in his mind. So not that there weren't problems with other board members, but there was definitely one person that sort of caused a lot of the toxicity that eventually came to be.
So a lot of well-meaning people
Yes.
on the board that were trying to figure out what their role was, and in fact, this one person having a role as a project manager, being able to transition back into being a board member was confusing and difficult. Mm-hmm. So when you think about that kind of environment being placed, and thinking about needing to move forward and the board not knowing how to move forward, how do we solve this? What was it like coming to the point of making a choice to bring somebody on, and maybe even specifically thinking about aligned influence?
I'll be honest, it was pretty terrible. The 2 years leading up to us hiring aligned influence to help us straighten ourselves out were really challenging. I walked around with a letter of resignation in my purse. I sometimes put it out on the table in front of me at board member meetings. I don't think anyone knew what it was. But it was just something that I put there to remind myself that I didn't have to tolerate the disrespect and the boundary crossing and other things that were happening. It was pretty bad. And again, to be fair, I think for some of them it was pretty uncomfortable too, because they didn't know how to correct course. And so we eventually, there was a moment in time where I met with our board chair and vice chair, and I basically said, I'm done if something's not done about this. We've got to do something about this. And they heard me, and then they started having board discussions about, okay, we got to do something. What are we going to do? And they knew, to their credit, that we couldn't do it by ourselves. We needed to hire someone.
Yeah. So when you think about the process of having picked an aligned influence, what do you remember about the experience, the process early on of getting started with aligned influence, and what was your experience like?
I'll be honest, I was skeptical because I wanted us to get back on track. But at that point, when we started working with Aligned Influence, I had at least 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4 years of working with a very challenging board, a very toxic dynamic under my belt. And I wasn't completely convinced that we were going to be able to turn everything around. What I found, though, is that when we started meeting and talking and going through the policies that needed to be put in place, it created a framework for having conversations that sort of took the emotion out of the situation and put us in a situation where we just had to make sense of the nuts and bolts. And I think that was very helpful.
Yeah. I think what I hear often is it was that talk about the roles, and that before we had a hard time understanding exactly what those roles were. We had policies in place. You said you were policy governance. We had governing policies in place, but something about that wasn't enough. When you think back about that, what wasn't enough?
In reality, I think the board just wasn't clear about what they were supposed to do besides read a few reports each month from me. And it didn't feel meaningful to them. So I think that is really a big part of the problem for a lot of nonprofit boards. You know, they're good-hearted people who want to serve. It needs to feel meaningful for them. They need to have a clear purpose for why they're showing up to these meetings.
Yeah. Did you had an initial training with that board, like that, where we kind of went through what aligned influence was? And I know that that's something we get to experience regularly, but I imagine that was pretty eye-opening for that board at the time.
I think there were a lot of aha moments and a lot of light bulbs that went off in that initial meeting, where people were like, oh, we do actually have an official role that we should be playing, right, and work that we should be doing.
Yeah. Dan, you talked about that coming into this. I don't remember if you said this was your first.
Yeah, it was.
First, and so a lot of questions about what does that mean, being on a board.
Right.
And you talked about that when you got here, all of a sudden, a lot of those questions were answered, right, about what it means to be on a board, and that you are the beneficiary of 8 years of work up to this, of putting this in place and going from 4 board chairs in front of you. So I want to think about those in this model. There's 3 words for the board and there's 3 words for the executive. So for a moment, just Dan, could you talk about those 3 words to direct and protect and enable, and how have those 3 words helped you and your board, the board that you lead, understand their role better?
Yeah, it's an incredibly clear framework. You know, when we talk about direct, right, we're talking about working with Suzanne and understanding how do we direct the organization towards missions that help the people that we serve, right? Making sure that we understand what the community needs are and helping the organization better achieve goals around that direction. The protect is pretty straightforward. Let's put some guardrails in place and help make sure those are easily communicated and that the organization understands them, operate within those guardrails, and then enable, right, to basically make sure that the center has what they need to move forward, to encourage, I'm blanking on words here, enable Suzanne and the rest of the center to accomplish the mission. And those kind of three, that triangle of those three words just really, I like structure, and so that's awesome to have that framework and that outline for us to be able to operate within, versus, as Suzanne mentioned, we want to help. We're here to, as volunteers, to try to make a difference in our community. And so without that framework, I think it's just all too easy to try to say, oh, I'm going to help by getting involved in this, or, I see this particular role, I should provide some feedback to that person, and it just makes you feel like you're doing something. Having the direct, protect, and enable framework through aligned influence just really kind of made it super clear.
And Suzanne, on that other side of that, the lead, manage, and accomplish, how do those three words help you understand how that role relates to those other three words?
Well, again, it created a very clear framework, but also it's almost like puzzle pieces that fit together. So their role complements my role and vice versa. And it just makes it a lot easier to understand what we're each supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that complementary side of those two sets of three words. So talk a little bit about, it's been 8 years of working through this. What are some of the things that you would say you've both learned along the way about this relationship between a board and an executive director? And if you were providing some insight to a new executive director, a new board chair, or someone who was early on in the process on your board or on your staff, what would you say to them about what you've learned along the way about this relationship?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I would say that I've learned it takes intentionality. It takes, focus or alignment on making sure that, like we think about the goal of the relationship between the CEO and the board is, effectiveness, right? Making sure that like we can communicate, effectively towards what the center's mission is. And so it is something that I think it's not quite as simple as just saying, here's this set of policies, here are these words, and what they mean, but that it's something we just kind of want to continue to keep focus on. It takes a little bit of effort, make sure new board members come in and understand, and sometimes as we're going through potentially challenging situations, trying to keep the focus on what our respective roles are. And so I think that's probably what I've learned, is that it's not something that's just once it's in place, you're good to go. And so you need to be intentional and make sure you're keeping that framework in mind as you go through the work.
Yeah. What would you say, Suzanne, to that new person?
Well, for a new ED, I would say you absolutely have to have some sort of framework for your board and you to work together, and aligned influence is the very best. It is impossible to have a long-term good relationship with your board of directors without a framework like this. People's natural tendencies is to do what they know. And so for board members especially, let's be realistic. Most board members are coming from a background where they've worked in industry or banking, or they've been attorney, whatever it is, they've had their own business. They're used to being doers. They're not used to being necessarily policymakers or enablers of the work. And so without a framework, it's very easy to see why folks end up veering into other person's job responsibilities. So it's really, really important for someone coming into a new role to make sure that that organization has a framework like aligned influence.
Yeah. If you were saying something to a Suzanne that was not new, they were experienced, but they were experiencing what you were experiencing. They're not brand new to this, but they're walking around with their letter of resignation in their purse. What would you say to them?
Well, that's not the first. Well, sorry, let me just start over. This has happened multiple times with multiple colleagues who have come upon a situation that's caused their relationship with their board to go off the rails. And I always bring up aligned influence and suggest that they contact you. The problem is the board has to buy into it too, and sometimes the board doesn't buy in. Sometimes you've got a board that wants to be micromanaging and involved in operations, and in that case, honestly, my advice to my colleague would be look for another job where you can work with a board that actually wants to be aligned. Because from my experience, fighting with a board of directors that does not want alignment is pointless.
Yeah.
I think well said. So we were talking early on about the challenges before we started all working together. So what are some of the challenges that have come up in the last 8 years that this structure has helped you work through? Think about, obviously when you just put this in place, challenges just don't go away. Can you think of one or two things where things have come up where you've had to think about, go back to this discipline of alignment, and that alignment helped you work through those things?
I know there have been a few.
Yeah,
I'm
I guess
trouble thinking of specifics.
We had discussions recently around making sure that the funds in our bank were insured properly, right? Yep. And so that was a situation where, as board members, we have some folks that have experience in that realm and understood some of the risks associated with that, and really wanted to provide more operational direction on here's what we should do with it, but aligned influence, I feel like, really helped us work through that in a way that, maintained those roles. As a board, we present, here are our concerns and the problems. We worked with you directly to figure out, what some of our options were, but at the end of the day, we get to say, here's the guardrails, and as long as we're all on the same page that they should be in place, it's up to you to figure out how best to operate within them. And I think that was an example. I don't know.
That's a great example. Mm-hmm.
So that was incredibly helpful for navigating that situation, and I think we did it really well.
Yeah. So were there any surprises along the way? Anything surprise you? If not, it's okay. But when you think back, has there been any, I heard you talk about ahas, but any surprises?
I think one surprise is that staff, once they learn about it and have gone through the training, it really helps them gain clarity about the organizational structure and what's appropriate and not appropriate. Because staff, let's face it, You're always going to have some folks that when they have their own agenda or they want to get their own way and they're not getting it because it's not in the best interest of the organization, or maybe we don't have enough money to buy them whatever it is that they want for their program right now. The tendency oftentimes is to try to find a workaround. And the workaround many times will be, oh, there's a board member in the building. I'm going to go see if I can pull them aside for a private conversation and talk about how mean Suzanne is because she won't buy this for us. And so I think a big surprise for me is how folks tend to immediately get it when they go through the training, and it provides clarity to them that that's actually not appropriate and that they shouldn't be doing that. So.
That's a great one. That's great. So what are things like now? If you had to describe Sister Carmen in 2024, 8 years after we've started this process, 8 years into this, how do you describe things now?
We're doing good work, and it feels like a well-oiled machine, you know, and I go back to some of the trainings that you have provided over the years where, you know, I think about the gears, right? And the gears turning each of the board on one side and the organization on the other, and kind of Suzanne and I as those gears linking the two together. And, you know, I don't know, it feels like we're able to tackle challenging situations. We're able to discuss, we have this framework that helps us understand what our roles are, and it's at least, I don't know what things were like previously, but for me, it feels like the, you know, month-to-month understanding of what are we going to cover, and having some structure there throughout the year. There are things that I have taken from my experience on the board at Sister Carmen as a result of the work that's been done with Aligned Influence into other parts of, you know, my leadership responsibilities outside of the center that I find just incredibly useful for taking away and helping other organizations I work with kind of do that more efficiently.
Yeah. How would you describe it today, Suzanne?
Pretty smooth functioning. Healthy. The relationship between myself and the board is very easy. We laugh a lot.
We do.
We work really well together. Yeah, it's easy. It's comfortable.
Interesting. It's comfortable. It's easy. I hear some joy. If I had to put what I described in the two of you, you're in a place where you could experience some joy working together. And all
That's
this.
fun. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great.
So you don't still have a resignation letter in there. There you go.
So how, and this may be sort of a repeat of the same question, but how has this work over the last 8 years helped Sister Carmen be more effective in the community?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because the main thing and the most important thing that comes to mind is that we're a very nimble organization. We know what our purpose is. We know what our direction is. It's very clearly outlined by the board with input from the community and from staff.
Yeah.
And as long as we stay within that direction, we can make decisions on our programming, adding programming, maybe saying goodbye to a program that's not working, collaborating with other agencies, applying for different grants. We can make those decisions internally and quickly, and that allows us to respond to challenges and opportunities really quickly. That has allowed us as an organization to take on projects that have put us in the forefront of this work in Colorado and the States. A great example is Bridging Digital Divides, the work that we're doing on digital equity. If we had to go to the board and say, can we do this? It may have led to months of discussion, which might have caused someone else to take on the leadership of that program. But we didn't have to do that because it's been delegated to me that as long as it falls within our direction, we can do it. And that's just one example. I watch other organizations who are using a more traditional governance model that is not very effective struggle because they have, don't get me wrong, we have committees, but we have committees that are organized around a very specific purpose, whether they're staff committees or board committees. I watch other organizations that are using a more traditional governance model that are so bogged down in getting everything discussed and approved through committee that it's not unheard of for them to not make a decision about something within a year. That's ridiculous because funding opportunities come and they go. And you might have a grant that's open for 3 months. If it takes your program committee a year to decide whether that's something they want to do or not, you've missed the opportunity.
And those needs change, so opportunities come and they're there for a short period of time, as well as things in the community, needs in the community change quite rapidly. And you and your staff you understand that closer, you're closer to the work, you understand what those are. We as a board, the last thing we want to do is get in the way of you all being able to do that good work in our community. And so it really does feel like, aligned influence helps build that trust between the organization and the board and allows it to be more nimble and quick reacting, which is I don't know that there is a better value for an organization such as Sister Carmen to be able to make those quick decisions and be able to answer the call of need in the community. So
what do you look forward to now?
Don't say retirement. Don't you say it.
I almost did, but
that's good. You deserve it, to be clear. We'll miss it.
Well, I look forward to seeing if eventually there's enough will amongst the people of this country to truly tackle some of the challenges that we're experiencing as a society. And I look forward to seeing how this organization will be a part of that, because it oftentimes feels like we've got our finger on the fire hose, and we're doing our very best to hold things together, and we're supporting a lot of people. It's a heavy weight that we're carrying on our shoulders, and it would be nice if some of this was resolved at a higher level.
Until then.
Yeah, and until then, we just keep at it day after day after day.
What are you looking most forward to?
That's an interesting question. I would love to say that I'm looking forward to the day, maybe echoing Suzanne's comment that Sister Carmen's not needed, but until then, I guess there have been a number of cases since I've been on the board where there have been, tragedy or real need in the community for a variety of reasons, and seeing how quickly and effectively Sister Carmen is able to respond to those situations and provide support, I'm incredibly proud of. And so, there's some part of I don't want to say it sounds, I'm looking forward to maybe the next opportunity or the next thing that comes where Sister Carmen's really needed and Suzanne and her team are able to step in and make a real difference. It's a really incredible feeling to, when you hear that the number one place to go if your house had burned down in the Marshall Fire, right, is go get support from Sister Carmen. And that, as a board member, it feels great to know that we are a part of that response and that we're able to help folks that are in, really bad situations. So I guess I'm looking forward to the next really no, that's terrible to say. You understand what I'm saying. looking for the opportunity to support folks that really need it. And yeah.
Actually, there was something that started to come up there and then it went away, is when Suzanne retires someday.
We'll be so thankful that we have this aligned influence model
I want
ready to
to
go.
talk about that just a little bit. So many organizations that I talk to are fearful of the moment, just frozen in fear of when their CEO is going to retire. Don't want that to happen anytime soon, but Suzanne, when you think about the moment, the day when you will say it's time for me to move on, or Dan, when you think about the moment that somebody's sitting in your chair, either you or somebody sitting in your chair that is going to be the chair of the board, and you think about that transition, how do you think all this work is going to impact that? Why do you have confidence about that transition now, or I know you're not desiring it, but when it happens, how do you think this work is going to impact that?
Well, it's not going to happen, so that's the first thing. I again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not. I have colleagues that have been involved in other nonprofit boards, but this so far has been my only experience in a nonprofit board, and I would say that it's going to be incredibly helpful to be able to communicate to that next director, that next CEO, about why Sister Carmen's board is different than other organizations they may have worked with up until that point, in that we have this framework in place that helps make sure that relationship between the CEO and the board is healthy and effective, and that we have an operating model. I think that's going to be critical in I know it's going to be helpful as we go through that process of trying to find someone to replace these massive shoes.
I'd say that as someone who walked into an organization and there were literally no policies about anything really. I mean, there was a lack of operational policies, and there were definitely no governing policies when I started. I feel that for the next person that has my role, it's going to be so much easier for them when they come in. All they have to do is familiarize themselves with the policies. All they have to do is look at past reporting that gives them a blueprint for how to do those things going forward. So much easier than coming in and having nothing and having to figure it all out from zero.
So in some ways, that next CEO and that next board chair is getting a gift from history and you all at this point in time.
Yeah,
For sure.
foundation's there.
Yeah.
What else is it that you would want to say to somebody else out there that's watching this video? What else is it that you'd want them to hear?
Having guidance, or framework, some sort of overarching. Don't do it on your own, right? Don't try to bang out the details on your own or figure it out. Like, find something like aligned influence. And I don't know if there's anything else out there like aligned influence, but aligned influence that helps you understand what that framework is, how to operate as a CEO, as the board, in that relationship. It's like, just don't try and do it on your own. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. Use a proven methodology.
I absolutely agree with that. I was going to say, don't go out on your own and think that you're going to figure this all out. We already have a really effective model. Use that.
Thank you guys so much for taking your time today. I want to give this as a gift to all those places out there that aren't doing something like this at this point. I want them to hear your voices as we move forward.
Yeah, seriously, so many need it.